They're trying to come around and I think and figure out a way they can demonize all of those who believe that male is male and female is female. If it's male, you use the male restroom. If it's female, you use the female restroom. The word assigned is also a snare word. We identify the sex at birth, not assigned. The fact that we're having this debate means there is an enemy who's at work. These issues now out in the headlines are a direct attack on our faith, on a creation order, on our God himself. So it's time for the pulpits to light it up, speak the truth, teach the people why we're having this discussion, why it's valuable. It's not against anybody. It's not hateful toward a person or an individual or even a group. It's because we love God and we love people. Welcome to the Christian Citizen, part of the ministry of U.S. Pastor Council. We take head on the mission of restoring godly citizenship as an effective ministry of the local Bible-believing pastor and church. Man calls it politics, but God calls it ministry, and our mission of, by, and for pastors is to bring a united biblical voice to the critical issues of our day. Scripture speaks to all issues impacting lives, and so should our pulpits. Join us for today's program. The issue we're going to talk about today is literally an international issue. It has exploded onto the scene in just recent years. But what we sometimes forget is that the enemy of our souls is always working, and he comes as an angel of light. And these issues often are moving below the surface in subtle ways before they explode into the public domain. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to show a local news story that just ran in Houston on the latest example of this particular issue. And so just listen to this and reflect on this.
The district also took a stand with its bathroom policy tonight. Explain to us what that means going forward.
Ethan, Daniela, that too, the school district now implementing that policy that requires students to use the bathroom that aligns with their biological sex, their gender that they are assigned at birth. This new policy that they passed does not stop the district, though, from providing special accommodations to students who ask. One example of that may be something like a single-person restroom. And all but one of the school board members voted to approve this new rule. The dissenting board member raised concerns about unintended consequences of the policy and whether it was even necessary after hearing from some concerned community members about how it may be problematic for the transgender community.
These three policies send a clear message to your transgender students that they are not safe or welcome at Spring Branch ISD schools.
Here we are, a local school district that just adopted a policy that says that you have boys and girls in that school have to use the restroom that is consistent with their sex. That is, now I'm going to go back to this as well, to say assigned at birth. And that's a news story that is brought, according to this news story, by the way, outrage from the community. Now, let's unpack this just a little bit. First of all, what this school board said is that what's on your birth certificate, if it's male, you use the male restroom. If it's female, you use the female restroom. Now, to back up just a minute, the word assigned is also a snare word here that even this board apparently kind of fell into this trap. Our sex is not assigned at birth. It's assigned at our conception. It is part of our chromosomes, it's part of our DNA. We identify the sex at birth, not assigned. That's part of the lingo that's being used by the LGBTQ community that we can somehow pick and choose at this stage. It's just part of their agenda, but we just can't buy into that. But let's just then move on from that and say, okay, they used the wrong word fundamentally, but they achieved the right objective, which is to say a biological male should use the boys' restroom, the biological female should use the female's restroom. Now, why is this controversial? And why is there so-called outrage in the community? Well, first of all, there is no outrage in the community. How often are you read a news story that, massive uprising in this, and you find out 3 Twitter accounts responded to some particular news story, and they use that to create a narrative that there's somehow some major public response. But if you really read down into this and pay attention to what's happening in this, it's all fabricated. So number one, the issue of the school board responding to this is because of the fact that this has now become a national story. It's become nationally evident that there's a specific agenda that has been going on for years, and it's evident in the headlines nearly daily of the attempt to undefine the concept of male and female. So we relate that to some phone calls I just received over this last week, which is really interesting. A week ago, I received a call from BBC London, and there's a reporter there wanting to do a story to talk about the Houston Hero Ordinance that occurred 8 years ago. Because the vote actually took place, the final vote on the ballot where the ordinance was defeated took place in November of 2015. The battle began in January of 2014. So they're kind of wanting to dig back into the who and the why. Who was it that you worked with? Who came up with this particular slogan? And of course, when I get those kind of calls, my question always is, and I will usually ask the reporter, why are you doing this story? Because, they're getting stuff thrown at them all the time, every day. There's things happening. They have to decide as a priority, they're going to spend some time on this particular issue. Why something that happened 8 years ago in Houston is now getting the attention that justifies a reporter's time from BBC London. Something's happening behind the scenes here that they're going, we got to go back here. And of course, frankly, from a cynical standpoint, dealing with the major media, I'm assuming the worst of their intent. But the question is, why are we doing this? And of course, I answered him the same way we had from the very beginning. Why would pastors stand and speak to this particular issue? And this particular ordinance, what did it do and why was it wrong? And what are the things that we brought to the front lines of this argument and this debate 8 years ago that have now become self-evident, and they're becoming incidents occurring all over the country? For example, one of the things that we talked about, and if you want to go to the website called No on Houston Prop 1, which we still have up, we put up to help defeat the ordinance once we finally got it to a vote of the people, which took a year in court to get there. But that ordinance was defeated by the vote of the people of Houston by 22 percentage points, 61 to 39. This website was put up as part of our projects as the pastors to speak to that issue at the ballot level. And we listed on this particular page, you can see legions of examples of how these kind of policies were already having massive negative predatory effect. One of the things that we brought out, because they're losing the public battle and the extreme nature of the transgender agenda, they're trying to come around and I think and figure out a way they can demonize all of those who believe that male is male and female is female. For example, one of the things that we called the ordinance in Houston was the Predator Protection Act. Because when you say that a male without any changes at all can change their identity to female and go into the ladies' showers and locker rooms, still having all the genitalia and of a man, then you have brought an immediate threat into the privacy of those women and those girls. That's just straight up by just simply by the exposure. Remember, we have public indecency laws, public exposure, indecent exposure laws. Okay, well, there is a reason for that. We historically have had standards. We recognize that the privacy in an undressed state should be respected between the sexes. Well, this kind of policy eviscerates that. So, and not only that, but then, of course, it opens the door. First and foremost, who are the first ones going to be through the door and taking advantage of that kind of a policy? It's going to be sexual predators. And that's this website shows example after example, all over America, that Alliance Defending Freedom provided to us. So this is not something we speculated even then 8 years ago. But the other things that we brought out as a critique of the dismantling the identity of sex is that males typically would then also use it to access girl sports. They would use it to access other things that were inherently set aside as protections for our women and our girls. And as we well know, now that the latest major story, Riley Gaines, who's now national news, who has made an issue because of the rise of males competing in college level and eventually all sports. They're trying to get into it. And look, it's not complicated. Anybody that understands basic biology and basic human structure understands why a male of mediocre capability can dominate in women's sports. But we developed women's sports for the very reason to give our girls an access to be able to compete amongst themselves with lesser physical capabilities as a group than men. God created men to be the protector, to be the provider. And so why are we having this debate? Why are we having this discussion now at the school's policy that simply says, if you're a male, use the male's restroom, female, use the female's restroom, is controversial because there is an agenda. There is an enemy of our souls who has hijacked and stolen the hearts and minds and poisoned the hearts and minds of people who have now become dominant and influential in our major institutions, who are pushing his agenda to destroy God's created order. And it's not that complicated. When we look at the things in Scripture, let's go back to Genesis 1. We've heard this passage over and over again in relation to this debate today. So this is our starting point. And it's not all there is to this, but it's where we begin. And that's in Genesis 1:26 and 7:28. Well, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. That's what we call the creation mandates. It's the first Great Commission, but it defines the vision and purpose God placed man on here on this earth. And we know the other elements of the creation there, that God said it's not good for man, it should be alone, and he created woman. But there's a component to this I brought up with this second call that I received, was an investigative reporter doing a story on this as well. And when I pointed out the fact that a lifestyle decision of the majority of the people will determine its perpetuity. In other words, if the dominant number of people, majority people, pursue, for example, to grow up, get married, have children within marriage, raise those children, and then those children grow up, get married, and then have children in stable, healthy homes. That is the foundational building block of a society in our entire civilization. It produces fundamental social stability and blessing and well-being and peace and prosperity. Those numbers are not arguable. They're documented in massive amounts of studies in every capacity of social condition. So, since we know that to be true, then what happens if the dominant number go the other direction? That we grow up, the family falls apart, those children are raised outside of marriage. Either they're born out of wedlock, raised out of wedlock, the family marriage disintegrates, those children grow up, have children outside of wedlock, and that social disorder, that decay, the family begins to break apart and produce all the disorder. We know what that does because those numbers are there as well. And that produces crime, chaos, suicide, drugs, alcohol, poverty, abuse. And those numbers are clear and evident as well. The fruits of those trees, both of them, are self-evident. So what's the end game here? And by the way, if we follow the path of transgenderism or homosexuality, the society, let me clarify, the species becomes extinct. Okay, can we follow that track? And this reporter had never thought through that. I said, well, what if everybody became homosexual or transgender? You cannot produce children. It's biologically impossible. And we can't even do that in the lab adequately enough to produce a civilization, and we will die. So the question is whether it's for self-perpetuality as a society, or we're following God's way. We're going to choose and decide which course we're going to go down the road in the future: destruction, chaos, and death, or we choose life. And Scripture is very clear on that as well. And all of history defends our position that God's way is the best way. So the fact that we're having this debate means there is an enemy who's at work. These issues now out in the headlines are a direct attack on our faith, on a creation order, on our God himself. So it's time for the pulpits to light it up, speak the truth, teach the people why we're having this discussion, why it's valuable. It's not against anybody. It's not hateful toward a person or an individual or even a group. It's because we love God and we love people, that the only way to heal and deliver people from the destruction of their sinful, carnal condition and decisions that will destroy them is to preach the truth of the gospel, the truth of the word, and help them to be set free. And that's our requirement from the very beginning. That's what we're called to do. So church, pastors, let's do that. Let's make sure that we're standing for God's created order with love, with boldness and in truth, so that we shut this agenda down in this country and turn this nation back to God. God bless you.